Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another true crime story that has haunted both investigators and families for more than a decade. Tonight, we are heading into the quiet farmlands of Minnesota, a place that seems peaceful by day, but where, one night in 2008, something unimaginable happened. This is the story of Brandon Swanson, a bright, easygoing college student who vanished without a trace after making one last phone call home. What began as a simple late-night drive soon became one of America's most chilling unsolved disappearances. Brandon was 19 years old, studying wind energy technology at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby. He was known for his sharp mind, polite nature, and sense of responsibility, the kind of person friends could always rely on. On the night of May 14, 2008, classes had just ended for the semester. Like many students celebrating the start of summer break, he joined a few classmates for a casual get-together before heading back to his hometown of Marshall. It was supposed to be an easy drive, about a half hour through flat, open farmland. But as the clock ticked past midnight, darkness covered the rural roads, and Brandon began his journey home alone. The air was cool, the fields silent, and there were no streetlights for miles. Somewhere along that lonely road, his car left the gravel and slipped into a shallow ditch. The wheels were stuck. But Brandon was not injured. He called his parents, thinking it would just be a small inconvenience before a good night's sleep. That phone call, lasting 47 minutes, became the center of everything that followed. Through the receiver, Brandon calmly described where he thought he was, near the small town of Lind. His father drove out to find him, while keeping him on the line. They both flashed their headlights, hoping to spot each other across the darkness, but somehow they never connected. Then came the moment that still echoes through every retelling of this case. The sound of footsteps, Brandon's voice suddenly tense, and then, oh shit! Silence. The call ended, and Brandon Swanson was never heard from again. By morning, his car was found abandoned on a dirt road nowhere near where he said he was. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no clues that made sense. It was as if the night itself had swallowed him whole. Brandon's disappearance did not just shock a community, it changed the law. His case inspired Brandon's law, which now ensures that police must act immediately in cases of missing adults, under unusual or dangerous circumstances. Yet even with renewed searches, dogs, and divers, no physical trace of Brandon was ever found. A responsible young man. A short drive home. A single phone call. And then nothing. Tonight, we look closer at what happened to Brandon Swanson, the 19-year-old who walked into the darkness and never returned. The evening of May 14, 2008, started like any other spring night in the rural Midwest. Brandon Swanson had just finished his finals at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. After a long semester, there was a sense of relief in the air, a freedom that only students feel when classes finally end. That night, Brandon met up with a few friends in Canby, a quiet town surrounded by endless fields of corn and gravel roads stretching toward the horizon. They laughed, shared stories, and said their goodbyes for the summer. Nothing about that evening felt unusual or dangerous. Around midnight, Brandon got into his Chevrolet Lumina and began the familiar drive home to Marshall, just 30 miles away. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. The roads between those small towns can be confusing, especially at night. They twist and turn, crossing through unmarked intersections and open farmland. In the dark, everything looks the same. Brandon took a wrong turn, and before long, his car slipped off the gravel and into a shallow ditch. It was not a serious accident. The car was not damaged, and Brandon was not hurt. But he could not move the vehicle on his own. Out there, in total darkness, with no lights or passing cars, he did what most of us would do. He reached for his phone. At 12:30 a.m., Brandon called his parents. His father, Brian Swanson, picked up. Brandon explained calmly that he would slid off the road but was fine. He thought he was near the small town of Lind, about 10 miles from home. Brian and his wife Annette immediately got in their truck and drove toward him, staying on the phone the entire time. For the next 47 minutes, Brandon's voice guided them through the night. They tried to coordinate landmarks, flashing headlights back and forth, but neither could see the other's lights. It was strange they seemed so close, yet completely out of sight. Brandon's voice remained calm, even patient, as he described where he was. Then, suddenly, frustration crept in. He decided to start walking toward the lights of Lind, believing he would eventually meet his parents on the road. His father kept the call going, listening as Brandon described his steps along the gravel path, the sound of crunching stones underfoot. And then the moment that changed everything, just after 1:15 a.m., Brandon suddenly said, "Oh shit." The line went silent. No rustling, no breathing, no sound of movement, just silence. His father tried calling back again and again, but there was no answer. That would be the last time anyone heard from Brandon Swanson. The next morning, the Swanson family contacted police. At first, authorities treated it like a simple missing person case. Maybe Brandon had wandered off or gone to a friend's house. But within hours, that assumption would collapse. His car was found miles away from Lind, nowhere near where he believed he was. And that discovery raised a haunting question. How could a short drive home turn into a complete disappearance? When the sun rose over western Minnesota on May 15, 2008, Brandon Swanson had been missing for nearly 8 hours. His parents, Brian and Annette, had spent the entire night driving the back roads, calling his name, redialing his number again and again, but every call went straight to voicemail. There was no trace of him, and the line between panic and disbelief had already blurred. At 6:30 a.m., they called the Lind Police Department to report him missing. What they expected was immediate action, but that was not what happened. Officers initially treated the situation casually. Brandon was 19, an adult. Maybe he would gone to a friend's place or fallen asleep somewhere. But Brian and Annette insisted this was not normal. Brandon was responsible, level-headed, and he would never simply vanish after a phone call that ended in fear. Eventually, search teams were deployed. Officers began tracing Brandon's last known location based on his cell phone signal. At first, everyone focused near Lind, since that is where Brandon believed he was. But nothing matched. There was no sign of his vehicle, no tire marks, no broken fences or tracks. Then, an unexpected breakthrough came from cell tower data. The signal from Brandon's phone had last pinged not near Lind, but 20 miles away, near the small town of Porter, Minnesota, a completely different direction. That discovery changed everything. The entire search zone shifted westward to the remote border area between Lincoln County and Yellow Medicine County. And that is where they found Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina sitting quietly in a ditch off a gravel road. The car showed no damage. The driver's door was open, the headlights were off, and the keys were missing. It looked as if Brandon had stepped out, expecting to return at any moment. Investigators examined the scene carefully. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of foul play. The surrounding terrain was flat farmland, crisscrossed with shallow ditches and fields that stretched endlessly in every direction. It was a place where a person could walk for miles and still feel lost in the same open emptiness. That discovery only deepened the mystery. If Brandon's car was so far from where he thought he was, how did he end up there? Had he been confused by the dark, or did something happen that caused him to lose his sense of direction entirely? Search teams expanded their efforts, Dozens of volunteers, police officers, and canine units scoured the area on foot and by helicopter. The dogs picked up a faint trail leading northwest toward the Yellow Medicine River, suggesting Brandon may have tried to follow the sound of running water or lights in the distance. But the scent eventually vanished near the riverbank, and beyond that, nothing. For days, the community kept searching through fields, woods, and water, but no sign of Brandon ever surfaced. Not his phone, not his wallet, not a single belonging. The question that haunted everyone now was chillingly simple. If he walked away from his car, where did he go, and why has not he ever been found? As hours turned into days and days into weeks, the search for Brandon Swanson transformed from a rescue operation into a chilling mystery. Despite helicopters, dogs, divers, and hundreds of volunteers combing the fields and riverbanks, there was still no trace of the missing 19-year-old. The first major theory investigators considered was accidental drowning. The scent trail from the search dogs ended near the Yellow Medicine River, and the region had multiple small waterways. Maybe, some suggested, Brandon had fallen in while trying to cross, his phone dropping into the water and cutting off the call. It sounded plausible until divers searched the entire stretch of the river several times and found nothing. No clothing, no personal items, no remains. The next theory focused on disorientation. That night had been pitch black, no moonlight, no street lamps, and endless gravel paths that all looked the same. Brandon may have been walking in circles, unknowingly moving farther from help. In rural Minnesota, distances can be deceiving. What looks like a few minutes away could actually mean miles of rough terrain. Another possibility investigators explored was foul play, that someone may have encountered Brandon that night, but there was never a shred of evidence. No signs of a struggle, no reports of suspicious vehicles, no witnesses who saw anyone on the roads around that time. The area where his car was found is so isolated that even a single passing car would have stood out. There were also small details that made everything even stranger. For example, Brandon's cell phone remained active for several hours after the call ended. His parents tried calling again and again, and sometimes the phone would ring before going to voicemail, suggesting it had not been turned off immediately. Yet no one ever answered. Was the phone still with him? Did it fall somewhere dry enough to avoid damage? Or was someone else near it? These questions led nowhere. Then came the weather factor. Temperatures dropped below freezing that night. Some theorized Brandon could have succumbed to hypothermia if he would become lost and exhausted. But again, even if that were true, why was not his body ever found? With thousands of acres searched, including farmland, drainage ditches, and wooded patches, anything should have surfaced. By the end of the summer, the official investigation had reached a frustrating standstill. Brandon's parents refused to give up, organizing community searches every year. But as time went on, the leads grew colder, and the silence grew heavier. It was not just a disappearance anymore, it was a vanishing without logic. Every clue contradicted the next. Every search ended where it began, in emptiness. Yet one thing remained constant, the haunting voice on that 47-minute phone call. The sound of a young man trying to find his way home. And then that final word, abrupt, startled, maybe frightened, echoing forever in the static of the night. Oh shit. That moment would stay with his parents for the rest of their lives and drive a movement that would soon change Minnesota law forever. In the weeks after Brandon Swanson's disappearance, hope slowly gave way to heartbreak. Search teams had covered miles of farmland, drained parts of rivers, and even brought in specialized dogs from other states. But the results never changed. There were no answers. For Brian and Annette Swanson, that silence was unbearable. They replayed every second of the phone call in their minds. His calm tone, his certainty about his location, that final startled word. But alongside their grief, they carried something else, frustration, not just at the mystery itself, but at the way the system had responded when their son first went missing. When they had called the police that morning, officers did not immediately act. Brandon was 19, legally an adult, and the assumption was that he might have gone off on his own. It was a familiar response, one that countless families of missing adults had faced before. Too often, the first hours, the most critical ones, were lost to hesitation. That hesitation haunted the Swansons. They knew their son had not just walked away from his life, and they believed no other family should ever have to wait for authorities to decide whether a missing person qualified for help, so they turned their grief into action. With the help of lawmakers, advocates, and local communities, the Swansons pushed for a new law, one that would redefine how police respond to missing person reports. After months of persistence, their efforts succeeded. In 2009, Minnesota passed what became known as Brandon's Law. Under this legislation, law enforcement must immediately begin investigating any missing adult case if there is reason to believe that person's disappearance involves danger or unusual circumstances regardless of age. No waiting periods. No assumptions. No delays. It may sound simple, but it represented a huge cultural shift in policing. It recognized that being over 18 does not make someone immune to harm, and that the first few hours can mean the difference between finding someone alive and never finding them at all. For the Swansons, this law became a way to ensure that Brandon's story meant something beyond tragedy. They could not bring their son home, but they could help protect others. And in the years since its passage, Brandon's Law has been credited with saving lives, prompting faster investigations and broader cooperation between local, state, and federal agencies. Every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, people across Minnesota still join volunteer searches, hoping to find even the smallest clue that might bring closure. And while the physical evidence has remained silent, Brandon's legacy continues to speak loudly through the law that bears his name. It is a bittersweet reminder that sometimes, out of the darkest nights, light can still emerge not as an answer but as a promise that no one else will be left waiting in the dark. More than 15 years have passed since the night Brandon Swanson disappeared, yet his name still echoes across the quiet fields of western Minnesota. Time has dulled few of the questions and none of the pain. Every spring, when the anniversary comes around, volunteers still gather with maps, GPS trackers, and hope. They retrace the same paths: gravel roads, riverbanks, drainage ditches, abandoned barns, searching for any sign of the young man who walked into the dark and never came back. The Lincoln County Sheriff's Office continues to classify the case as an active missing person investigation, though most now call it what it truly is, a cold case. There have been dozens of tips over the years, someone spotting a jacket, a shoe, or human remains in nearby counties. But each lead has ended the same way: unconfirmed, unrelated, or inconclusive. The biggest obstacle is not just time, it is terrain. Much of the area around Taunton and Porter is privately owned farmland, and not every landowner has allowed access for search teams or cadaver dogs. Even small gaps in coverage can leave entire acres unchecked, and after so many years, evidence that once might have been clear could now be long gone. Search experts have said that if Brandon had fallen into the Yellow Medicine River, the water levels and current at the time would likely have carried him far downstream. But multiple dives and sonar scans over the years have produced nothing. Others believe he never made it to the river at all, that his scent ending there could simply mean he turned or crossed paths that dogs could not trace further. In 2023 and again in 2024, renewed searches were organized using modern drone technology and heat mapping systems. These efforts focused on revisiting unexplored patches of land, following digital models of likely walking routes based on Brandon's last phone signal. But even with 21st century tools, no physical evidence has ever been found. Investigators have admitted that the case continues to puzzle them. There is no proof of foul play, but also no clear sign of an accident. It is as if Brandon simply stepped out of his car and vanished between one breath and the next. For his parents, Brian and Annette, the years have been both cruel and kind. Cruel, because there is still no closure. Kind, because their son's story has helped others through Brandon's law, through public awareness, through every officer who now acts faster when someone disappears. Even now, people driving through that part of Minnesota sometimes stop and look out across the fields, thinking of the boy who vanished on a quiet May night. Somewhere out there, his story lingers in the wind, not forgotten, not silent, but waiting. And until the truth is found, the search for Brandon Swanson will never truly end. 15 years later, investigators and internet sleuths alike are still debating one question. What really happened to Brandon Swanson? There are no answers carved in stone, but several leading theories have stood the test of time, each with fragments of truth, and each with missing pieces that refuse to fit. The first and most widely accepted theory remains accidental drowning. The dog's scent trail led toward the Yellow Medicine River, and the area around it is rugged, with tall grass, mud, and unstable banks. In the darkness, it is easy to imagine a young man losing his footing, slipping into the cold water and never resurfacing. Yet years of dives, sonar scans, and seasonal searches have never recovered a single trace. Not his clothing, not his phone, not even bones or jewelry. For many, that absence makes the drowning theory difficult to fully accept. Another explanation points to disorientation and exposure. The night was moonless, temperatures dropped below freezing, and Brandon had already walked for miles. Some experts believe he may have wandered deep into the fields and succumbed to hypothermia. If so, natural decay, weather, and farming cycles might have destroyed or buried any trace of him over time. It is possible and heartbreakingly simple, yet again, no concrete evidence supports it. Then there is foul play, a theory more complex and controversial. Could someone have picked Brandon up after the call dropped? Rural Minnesota is quiet, but not empty. Truckers, farmers, and late-night travelers sometimes pass those roads. A chance encounter, an argument, or worse it is, within the realm of possibility. Still, investigators have never uncovered any sign of struggle, witnesses, or suspects. Brandon's calm, steady voice throughout the call also suggests he never felt threatened before the abrupt end. A few armchair detectives have floated the idea of voluntary disappearance, suggesting Brandon might have walked away from his life, but those who knew him dismissed this immediately. He was close to his family, had clear plans for his future, and showed no signs of distress or intent to leave. Even if he wanted to vanish, why call his parents and stay on the line for 47 minutes, guiding them toward him? Finally, there is the medical emergency theory that Brandon may have suffered a sudden event like a fall, seizure, or head injury after the phone call ended. It could explain the abrupt, "Oh shit," followed by total silence. If he collapsed in a remote or overgrown spot, the elements could have hidden his remains beyond discovery. Each theory feels plausible, and yet none can explain everything. His voice on the phone, his calmness, the vanishing trail, the missing evidence, all resist easy answers. As one investigator once said, it is as if Brandon just walked out of existence. And that is the chilling truth. The night holds its secrets still. For Brandon's parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, life after May 14, 2008, became divided into two worlds, the one before their son disappeared and the one after. The difference between the two was silence. In the early days, that silence was almost unbearable. Every time the phone rang, their hearts stopped, hoping for news. Every unfamiliar number brought a jolt of fear and hope mixed together. When the calls stopped coming, the emptiness that followed became its own kind of grief, a grief without closure. But the Swansons refused to disappear into despair. Instead, they turned their heartbreak into purpose. They learned to navigate the media, to organize search teams, to speak with lawmakers. They spent countless hours driving those same gravel roads, scanning ditches and fields, looking for anything that might lead them to their son. Over the years, the small communities of Marshall, Canby, and Lind have continued to stand beside them. Volunteers, farmers, teachers, college students, and even complete strangers have joined in annual search efforts. Many of them never met Brandon, yet feel a connection to his story. In towns where people leave their doors unlocked and neighbors wave to passing cars, his disappearance was a wound that never fully healed. Local churches organized prayer vigils. Radio stations aired reminders of his case each spring. Some residents even kept the porch lights on for a week every May, in quiet tribute to the boy who walked into the dark. For Brian and Annette, those gestures mattered deeply. They have said that the community's kindness has been the light guiding them through years of uncertainty. "It is not about giving up," Annette once said. "It is about never letting Brandon fade from memory." Still, living in that in-between space has taken its toll. Every holiday, every milestone, every quiet evening carries the same question. Where is he? They have learned to live around it, but never beyond it. The Swansons also became advocates for families of missing persons. They have spoken at awareness events, sharing what they wish they had known that night, how every minute matters, how hesitation can cost everything. Through Brandon's law, their son's name became more than a symbol of loss. It became a promise of action. To this day, the case remains open. Police say they still receive tips, though few lead anywhere. But for the Swansons, even one call is reason enough to keep hoping. Someday, Brian once told a local reporter, "Someone will know something, and we will be ready to listen." In the heart of Minnesota, surrounded by endless fields and quiet skies, the search for truth continues not with fear, but with love, persistence, and an unshakable belief that answers are still out there. As years passed and police reports grew thinner, the case of Brandon Swanson might have faded into the background, just another cold file among thousands of unsolved disappearances. But that never happened. Instead, Brandon's story began to spread far beyond Minnesota. It became one of the most discussed missing person mysteries on the internet, where ordinary people, amateur sleuths, and digital detectives began piecing together what little the official record had left behind. It started on online forums, places like Web Sleuths, Reddit's Unresolved Mysteries, and Facebook community pages devoted to cold cases. Users shared maps, analyzed phone tower data, compared aerial photos, and debated theories late into the night. Some created digital models of the possible routes Brandon could have taken. Others tried to reconstruct the final 47-minute phone call, second by second, using voice timelines and hypothetical movements based on cell signal strength. Soon, the story spread to podcasts and YouTube channels. True crime creators revisited it not just for its mystery, but for what it revealed about human nature, how a calm, logical young man could vanish in an age of cell phones, GPS, and constant connectivity. How someone could be on the phone for nearly an hour and still never be found. What fascinated listeners most was the eerie normalcy of it all. Brandon was not running away, involved in crime, or living dangerously. He was just a college kid heading home. That ordinariness made the story haunting, because if it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. As new generations discovered the case online, digital communities began to treat it almost like a collective puzzle. Some claimed to have spotted overlooked details in police documents or satellite images. Others tried to organize independent searches, reaching out to local law enforcement to coordinate safe, legal efforts. While many of these attempts did not produce tangible results, they kept Brandon's name alive year after year, algorithm after algorithm. Even now, his story is retold on YouTube documentaries, true crime TikToks, and cold case podcasts. But the online attention also came with challenges. Not all theories were kind or accurate. Some speculated wildly, accusing innocent people or creating false leads. Brandon's family, though grateful for awareness, often reminded the public that behind every mystery was real grief, real parents still waiting for their child to come home. Yet despite the noise, one thing remained constant. People cared. Across social media, strangers continue to post every May 14th with a simple message: still missing, still searching. In a way, Brandon's story became something larger than a single tragedy. It turned into a symbol of how the digital world refuses to forget, how compassion and curiosity intertwine in the search for truth, and even in a world of fleeting attention spans, the mystery of Brandon Swanson endures an unresolved echo that continues to call from the dark, asking the same question no one can answer. Where did he go? If there is one moment that defines the disappearance of Brandon Swanson, it is the final seconds of that phone call, a 47-minute lifeline between a son and his father, ending with two words that would echo for years. For nearly an hour, Brandon and his dad, Brian Swanson, had been calmly working together. Brandon described landmarks, gravel roads, fences, and distant lights as he tried to guide his parents toward him. He was polite, patient, even apologetic for the inconvenience. His voice never suggested fear. He thought he knew exactly where he was, but he did not. That realization, though no one knew it yet, was the turning point. Brandon believed he was near Lind, but his phone signal would later prove he was miles away, near Porter, Minnesota. It was as if he had unknowingly stepped into a mirror world familiar enough to feel safe, but wrong enough to get lost forever. Throughout the call, Brian and Annette drove up and down the back roads, flashing their headlights, hoping he would see them. Brandon swore he could see their lights in the distance, but they were never in the same place. It was a cruel trick of geography, flat land, night air, and endless horizons that made distances impossible to judge. At some point, frustrated and tired, Brandon said he would start walking toward the lights of Lind. His father kept him company, staying on the line as he walked through the gravel and tall grass. The conversation drifted casual, ordinary, filled with small talk to pass the time. Then, abruptly, it was not ordinary anymore. Brian later recalled hearing his son's voice suddenly shift sharper, startled, and then, those two words, "Oh shit." And then, silence. Not static. Not fumbling. Just gone. Brian's first thought was that Brandon had dropped the phone, or fallen. He called out to him, over and over, but there was no response. He redialed immediately, but the calls went unanswered. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail, suggesting it was still powered on somewhere. For hours afterward, both parents tried to call again and again, clinging to the hope that he would pick up, but he never did. Those final seconds became the heart of every theory that followed. Did Brandon trip and fall into water? Did someone appear on that lonely road? Did he see something in the dark? Or was it something as simple and tragic as misjudging his step in the blackness of night? Investigators can't say for sure. The phrase, "Oh shit, so small, so ordinary," became a chilling monument to everything unknown. To his parents, that moment is both unbearable and sacred. It was the last proof that their son was alive, and the instant he was gone, every retelling of this case returns to that silence. Because somewhere, buried within it, may still lie the truth of what happened that night. Even in its silence, the disappearance of Brandon Swanson reshaped the way people think about missing person cases not only in Minnesota, but across the United States. What happened to him became a lesson in how quickly someone can vanish, and how slowly the world reacts when it does. Before 2008, many law enforcement agencies followed an unofficial rule. If an adult went missing, they usually waited before taking action. The logic was simple: adults had the right to leave. Maybe they wanted space or were staying with friends. But Brandon's story showed how dangerous that assumption could be. The Swanson family learned that the first few hours are everything. Every hour lost can erase a scent trail, scatter evidence, or let a person drift beyond the search grid. Brandon's law passed in 2009 turned that painful truth into legal action. Now, Minnesota requires immediate investigation if any adult is reported missing under suspicious or concerning circumstances. That law sparked broader conversations across the country. Other states began re-examining their policies. Training programs for police and dispatchers started using Brandon's case as an example, a reminder that compassion and urgency are not opposites, but partners. The influence also reached the world of volunteer search teams. Civilian organizations began using better mapping software, GPS tracking, and scent detection dogs earlier in searches. The missing person community started to emphasize cooperation between local police and civilian groups, instead of the old habit of working separately. In universities, criminal justice students now study Brandon's case when learning about rural search operations. It has become part of the curriculum in several states, not just for what went wrong, but for what it taught. But perhaps the deepest impact was not legal or procedural. It was emotional. Brandon's disappearance made people rethink how fragile communication really is, even in a world of technology. A phone call lasting nearly an hour could not save him. GPS signals, towers, and search helicopters could not find him. His case reminded the world that sometimes, even with all our modern tools, nature and fate still hold power over us. The case also gave families of missing persons a kind of voice they would never had before. The Swansons became symbols of persistence, ordinary parents who refused to be quiet, who turned tragedy into reform. Through interviews and awareness campaigns, they showed others that grief can move mountains, that advocacy can outlive despair. To this day, Brandon's name appears on posters, search training manuals, and missing person awareness events. His story continues to teach law enforcement, inspire volunteers, and comfort families who feel forgotten. And maybe that is the greatest form of justice his story could have. Not the kind written in court records, but the kind that lives on in every searcher who refuses to give up when the trail goes cold. It has been more than 15 years since Brandon Swanson stepped into the night and disappeared. And yet, even now, his story feels unfinished, suspended somewhere between memory and mystery. In that quiet stretch of rural Minnesota, life has gone on. Crops are planted, roads are paved, and new families move into old houses. But for those who know the story, the landscape will never feel ordinary again. Every gravel road, every narrow ditch, every rustling field of corn seems to whisper the same question. What happened to Brandon that night? There are no definitive answers, only echoes. A 19-year-old student driving home after a long day. A phone call lasting nearly an hour. A calm voice suddenly cut short. A car found abandoned, miles from where it should have been. And then, nothing. But silence does not mean the story has stopped. Over the years, Brandon's disappearance has inspired countless people, detectives, volunteers, and strangers who never met him to keep searching, not just for him, but for understanding. His case stands as a reminder that even in a world connected by technology, it is still possible to vanish in plain sight. And that thought alone is what makes this story so haunting. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, continue to live with hope balanced against heartbreak. They have said that finding answers is not just about closure, it is about dignity. Everyone deserves to be found, they have often told reporters. Their courage turned one family's tragedy into a statewide change, ensuring that no other parent would have to hear that it is too soon to look for their missing child. Theirs is a story not only of loss, but of resilience, of how love can outlast time, and how a single night can change how an entire state responds to crisis. And perhaps that is why people still talk about Brandon Swanson, not just because of how he vanished, but because of what his disappearance revealed. That in every mystery there is humanity, a family waiting, a community searching, and a question that refuses to fade. Somewhere out there, under the same stars he walked beneath, the truth still waits. It might be hidden beneath soil, carried away by water, or simply lost to time. But for those who remember him, the search itself is an act of faith. Faith that answers, no matter how long they take, will one day find their way home. Until then, Brandon's name lives on not in tragedy alone, but in every call made sooner, every search begun faster, every family given hope because of the law that bears his name. Because sometimes, justice is not about catching someone. It is about never stopping the search. And for Brandon Swanson, that search still continues. And that is the story of Brandon Swanson, a young man who vanished into the quiet heart of Minnesota, leaving behind a mystery that refuses to rest. His case reminds us that even in a world filled with lights, signals, and technology, there are still places where darkness can hide the truth. But his story is also one of hope, of parents who turned loss into action, of a community that never stopped searching, and of a law that now ensures no family will ever be told to wait and see. If you have watched until now, take a moment tonight to think of Brandon and of every missing person whose story still lingers unanswered. Because sometimes the smallest act of remembering keeps the light alive longer than we think. Thank you so much for joining me in tonight's episode. If you found this story moving or thought-provoking, please do not forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps these forgotten stories continue to be told. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and never stop looking for the truth. Good night, everyone.